Just hit record. I'd like to welcome everyone to the North Dakota Association of Regional Councils Resource Call today. We're excited that you're all able to be here with us. It is my pleasure today to welcome my former colleague, Jodi Bruns. Jodi is a leadership and civic engagement specialist with North Dakota State University. And she brings a unique perspective, I think, to this topic of collaboration over competition, because she's got that experience of working across the state with a lot of different groups and learning how they've partnered on different things. So I'm excited for her to be with us here today and all of you joining us. Thank you. At the end, we will share some resources of where to go for some different data and things. But if you guys have other ideas that we can add to that resource list, that would be great. So I welcome that. Jodi's going to kick off our session today as we talk about how we can work together across organizations and communities and different sectors. She'll present for about 30 minutes and then we'll have some time for Q&As. But if they have questions, is it okay if they ask as we go, Jodi?
Course. Yeah, absolutely. I always prefer a discussion over a lecture any day of the week. So please.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Jodi and we'll get started.
Great. Thanks, Andrea. Nice to be here with all of you. I do have just a few slides just for reference. And so my plan is to talk a little bit about regionalism, obviously community collaboration versus competition, and then share some examples. Um, And so, yeah, by all means, if you have questions as we go, let's talk about that. Yeah, it looks good, Andrea. Thank you for doing that. So, just a little background. So, in my experience, I've worked with Extension for almost 25 years, and so have had the opportunity to work with a lot of communities across the state. It's certainly been a privilege to see those that work well together. And, speak from my own experience. I live in Southeast North Dakota and have been a part of a lot of community work and certainly I appreciate working with other communities. I just feel like there's always strength in numbers and working better together. And so some of that is a mindset too, being willing to let go of who won the basketball game in 1965. I still hear examples of that, like communities just aren't sure if they're ready to let that go. And so I have a quote that I have hanging in my kitchen, and it says, "History should be a guidepost, not a hitching post." And I think that is applicable to community work and knowing that we can certainly learn from our past and from successes and maybe failures, but know that it's okay. Change can be hard, but it can also be so valuable for communities to be willing to look at possibilities and working together. And so there's some of my commentary and personal experience working with communities. But there is a great deal, a body of work around research uh, with communities who have seen great success working together. And some of those statistics show that communities experience higher rates of success in economic development, sustainability, and public service, compared to those who stand alone or really choose to work siloed. Um, and so collaborative communities benefit from shared resources, economies of scale, and shared knowledge. And know that when I talk about economies of scale, obviously North Dakota, we are a very rural state. And it has been frustrating to me over the years when organizations come here and, for example, our Tri-County tourism effort, so the community is of Emmons and McIntosh and Logan counties in South Central North Dakota. We worked on a USDA rural development project called Stronger Economies Together. And the representative I think she came from the Southern Rural Development Center, maybe in Missouri. And Bill Davis brought her to Wishick And I think Rachel was quite shocked at what we consider rural, and she was very adamant that we weren't rural, we were frontier. And so I think it's important to understand that most people outside of North Dakota don't have a grasp of what our economy looks like. And so working together and creating that economies of scale and knowing that no one understands us better than those of us who live here and work with rural issues every day. So with that, Andrew, I want you to go to the next slide, please. Okay, great. So um, again, research shows us that communities who collaborate have higher success rates, obviously working together, um, and benefit stakeholders, sharing knowledge, have higher economic performance just because of peer just working together, sharing resources, sharing what works, lessons learned, reduce costs. I just had an example from League of Cities yesterday, shared with me that the community of Mandan and the county of Morton County share some snow removal services. And so, genius, I think that's great in reducing costs, resilience and social capital. And we all know examples of where, at least I've seen where, or maybe our ambulance or fire departments have had fundraisers and is supported by many communities in the county and across county line. And all of that boosts social capital. You think about people who show up for fundraisers, a family in need, or a farm family's faced a tragedy, and people show up. I think we are the finest example in rural communities of high social capital when it comes to situations like that. And certainly reduce duplication of services. Even 20 years ago, I think about how communities, um, how we just didn't even travel as much as we do now. We just don't think twice about, I live 15 miles from a community, and there's times we have three vehicles on the road and we don't even think twice about it. It's just the nature of the beast. And so, um, you know, being more open-minded and willing to, reduce some of that duplication. Um, I would say maybe the mindset was more of seeing more barriers than opportunity 20 years ago. And so I think that's a very positive situation to think about the possibilities instead of the barriers and the reasons that we wouldn't want to work together. So I have three, I would say, bullet points I just want to touch on briefly about in regards to enhanced stakeholder confidence. And in my experience, the more people you have involved, more stakeholders, people have ownership and buy-in into projects instead of just a handful of people making decisions and determining how to move forward on a project. The more people you have involved, yes, you might have more, it might take more time to discuss issues with people, but certainly there's safety in numbers and just being part of a bigger solution. Um, I see that there's having more people involved, there's greater buy-in. So I think that's important. Certainly, um, improved outcomes. Again, collaborative efforts, allowing communities to grow the pie versus, um, being concerned about, having I would say, um, a mindset of abundance versus scarcity. So just because the community next door received a grant for something, that doesn't mean that another community that there are less resources. Um, More and more in grant opportunities, I am seeing that regional approaches to funding are being favored. And so I think that's a very important aspect of working together and embracing regionalism too. Better alignment of resources. Um, I think this is an important factor that's facing all of our rural communities as we look at that 3% cap on property taxes and just being very cautious in how we utilize those property tax resources, and knowing that we have to get creative and mindful of how we utilize those resources. And if we can take a regional approach and using data to support those decisions, I think we can get there, but we have some constraints. But recognizing that this is a great opportunity to certainly be creative in our approaches. So, Andrew, next slide, please. So, how do we get there? I think it's a mindset. Um, most communities, in my experience, are willing to work together. There's always that concern of, coming to the table, just having that conversation. I just visited with a neighboring community who's looking at a co-op for athletics. And so she asked me how, when my son played football, there was Edgeley, Ellendale, and Cullum, and now they play successful football together. And resoundingly, it was the parents who were more concerned about the outcome versus the athletes. The athletes just wanted an opportunity to play ball. And the best man in my son's wedding was from Cullum. And so he would never have met Wyatt unless they indeed had a successful cooperative. And so I think about young people's attitude of creating an opportunity to meet more friends, have more fun, instead of, a siloed effect. And like, we don't want to give up the past. We don't want to give up our norms, the things that are comfortable, the things we understand. And I think that successful school cooperatives can certainly be transferable to successful community collaborations. And so, as far as communication, I think that's the foundation of really creating a great regional collaboration or partnership, is just having the conversation. As a facilitator, I'm all for having a facilitator to lead those conversations. But I think it can start with simply reaching out to a neighboring community and saying, hey, what if we just get together for breakfast once a month and talk about what's happening? What are the issues that you're facing? Maybe we can work together on something. But certainly know that those of us in Extension are willing to help facilitate regional community meetings. If it works out, we're happy to join that effort. But certainly start with a simple conversation. And I think it's important to clarify expectations. Why are you coming together, and what do you want from the partnership? And having clear expectations builds trust. And when we can trust each other, that's when the real work begins. And so I would say collaboration is certainly an opportunity, as we all know, to, work together and not to duplicate those resources that are oftentimes very limited. And I think all those lead to successful commitment, and having an open mindset and realizing that if Edgeley is successful, that doesn't mean that Ellendale won't be successful. And so a lot of that, I think, is indeed mindset. So I'm curious. I'm confident you all have experiences. Why don't more communities utilize a regional approach? Is anyone willing to just turn your mic off and throw out an example or write something in the chat?
I think part of sometimes people are just scared. They've never done it before.
Hmm.
The
Fear of the unknown.
unknown.
Yep, absolutely.
I also think sometimes it's along with fear, it's feeling like, is this possible? It seems so big, so many tentacles, like herding cats, shall we say?
Hmm. Yes.
And I'd add, just like in the case of grocers, for example, they're so busy in their day to day that they're just kind of treading water and don't feel they have the capacity to explore these kind of transformational collaborations.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. In
And
many,
then
yeah, go ahead.
I
Go
was
ahead,
just gonna say, I'd
Ellen.
go to the interested and the willing too. And sometimes they feel like maybe it's not their role to spearhead something like that, but it really can be spearheaded at any level, and when you get into local government entities or county government entities, or chambers, tourism groups, etc. It could be as simple as calendar and coffee. Bring your
Of
calendar.
course.
Let's make sure we're not overlapping on one another's events and activities, and then see where the conversation takes you.
Right. That's an excellent point, Ellen. I mean, and it's certainly, I mean, resources are limited in our communities. And so to get away for an hour or two is challenging. I recognize that. And I understand that 100%. But I'll use the example. And Andrew has heard me say this 1,000 times. I mean, doing something again and again and expecting a different result. I mean, we all know that's insanity. And so maybe we have to take some chances and think outside the box. So, yeah, thank you for that. Next slide, Andrew. So I just want to talk briefly about 3 examples. So the first one of really successful examples of regionalism. So the Rendezvous Region Tourism Council, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this. So this is the Cavalier, Pembina, and Walsh communities. And so this tourism effort started about 8 years ago. And so I have stayed in close contact with Carrie Hugo. She's our extension agent up there and in Cavalier. And Carrie really has an interest, and I know she's facilitated several meetings in regards to the Rendezvous region. And so I reached out to Carrie and asked, what's going on with this effort? And what started out as, she said it started out as 4 cities and now has really grown into these cities that encompass these 3 counties and has had a great deal of success. And one some of the member benefits, I just want to point out to you that I thought are pretty smart. So member benefits, increased exposure through joint marketing campaign, that's genius. Regional branding on websites, social media, and access to valuable data. So on tourism trends, visitor statistics, and regional insights to support your business decision. And certainly when people travel for tourism, it's never one stop. It's what else can we do while we're here? And so that affects a regional effort as far as economics, certainly. Another example is the Emmons County Interagency in childcare, and then the Horizons Housing Initiative. And so I'll just have Andrew go to the next slide, and I'll continue talking about the other 2 efforts. So if you're curious, the Rendezvous region does have a Facebook page, and so that's just a screenshot from that, and that's been very successful. The Emmons County Interagency. So several years ago, I was in Linton, and I think I led a training there, and a lot of discussion happened around their interagency effort. And so I recently reached out to Acacia Stuckel again, a local extension agent, and asked, tell me about what's going on with the interagency. And so they meet quarterly, and I just have always been impressed by this effort as a regional effort. And community members come together quarterly in the various communities. They rotate the meetings. The ones I've attended have been at the in the courthouse in Linton, and I just think it's a great effort. Um, I'll just read what Acacia wrote to me. So let's see, they came together for funding used from the secondhand store that they opened at the time, and then most recently, they have been working on a community childcare. And so that's the picture I shared with you. They implement and support activities promoting healthy lifestyle choices with local agencies, sometimes targeting anti-drug, health and safety, economic development, and parenting. So that's all things community. Their mission is to overcome challenges by creating solutions to build stronger communities. And so I mean that's completely informal. It's update whatever community, the meetings I've attended. What's everyone working on? Are there grant opportunities you're working on? How can we support each other? Um, and to reduce duplication of services for sure. If something's happening in Strasbourg, maybe how can Linton support that effort? And so I think that's an excellent example of regionalism and also utilizing, I asked Acacia too, like how do you project, providing for childcare? And she said they indeed do use statistics provided by the school and looking at births and class size to, prepare for childcare needs. So I think that's a great example of how they work together and utilize local data for decision making. And then finally, the third example I want to share is our Horizons Housing Initiative. And so I can't believe it's been 20 years ago, but it still has impact in our state today. So I think it's a great example of collaboration. So 3 communities received a large grant from the Northwest Area Foundation in about 2004, maybe. And so it was a regional approach. And so the communities of Ellendale and Ashley, North Dakota, and Eureka, South Dakota, worked together, applied for the grant collaboratively because it was a regional award. And they had a number of benchmarks they had to achieve. And in one of the community meetings, we had, through the grant dollars, hired Dr. Rich Rathke, who was the state demographer at the time, to simply share regional and data trends with the 3 communities. So they had representatives from each of the communities at this meeting. And I recall that we met in Eureka and we rotated those meetings, but that particular meeting happened to be there. And all 3 communities at the time were really struggling with housing issues. They had young families who wanted to move to the communities, but there weren't adequate houses. But there were no places for older adults to transition to. And so there was a great deal of discussion, and based on the data that Dr. Rathke had provided, they had learned about a housing program that was happening and available to South Dakota communities, but not in North Dakota communities, because communities by law could not form a housing authority if they were under 5,000. And so those communities worked together along with local lawmakers, to get the law changed so local communities under 5,000 could indeed form a housing authority and they could bond money to build these housing units. And so it's not a very good picture, but there's over 40 of these units built across the state of North Dakota, and many of you are probably familiar with them, but didn't know the backstory. And so I think that is a shining star of what happens when communities collaborate and recognize that they have many of the same issues. And how can we work together? They changed state law, and um, and now many of these that were owned by the housing authority are now being sold to the private sector and put back on the tax rolls. So that's really exciting, the transition that's happened in 20 years, just based on community conversation, a simple community conversation. And so I know, Andrew, you have a number of resources. And so I want to make a reference to a couple of those that I know communities have used and I have used, specifically the State Data Center, which is now held in the Department of Commerce. And so there's 2 demographers that work there. And I also really appreciate the reports that you can use once you get there. You can look at data projections. So even if you're not a statistician, I have found the reports very interesting and helpful. And also the other, not Consensus Council, I apologize. The Center for Social Research is located at NDSU, and that website is also very user-friendly, and they have data broken down by counties and by demographic and a number of other markers. And so I know, Andrea, you compiled this document with a number of data sources. And so I think that is very helpful when communities start having conversations about what will our community look like in 10 years? what are the needs? And certainly we can try to foresee some of those things. I looked recently at the Department of Commerce, the state data center, and I just look at the area where I'm at right now. I mean, who would have projected that these data centers would have come in and changed the just the demographics of our communities where these data centers are located? And so that will have it, and it has had a huge impact on a regional impact on housing, childcare, groceries. It's been huge. And so we can't always foresee what the future holds, but I'm a firm believer it's important to make friends before you need them. And so not knowing what the future holds, I think it's so wise for communities to be having conversations before a data center shows up or before other efforts come into our communities. I mean, sharing resources, understanding the resources that communities have right now, and how can we best utilize those resources. And so just the last slide is my contact information, and let's have a conversation. Let's visit for a few minutes. Just know that you're welcome to reach out to me and have further conversation or do some brainstorming or whatever I can do to help. So with that, that's that's what I had as far as a formal presentation, but let's by all means, let's have some conversation here or questions or how can I help?
Yeah, does anyone have any questions? I did put in the chat that resource sheet that we've developed. If anyone has any other resources that we've missed on there, please let me know. We will link that to our North Dakota Association of Regional Councils website, where these call recordings are as well. So there's just, I think it's a combination of bringing everything together, communication, trust, data, having the resources available, especially when you go to take these projects to the next level. So I think the more tools we have in our pocket, places to go for that information, the better off we are. And it was good for me to go. Some of these were new to me. I hadn't been on before, and some I just hadn't been on for a while. So there's some good resources there that can be shared. And like ND Compass, they have some good articles on their website too. A lot of these websites also just have a lot of good information along with that data.
Yeah, that's a great point, Andrea. Know that the Center for Social Research, that's the home to this to what the newsletter Andrea just referenced. And they do have it's a monthly newsletter. And so you can just sign up for that. I don't know if you can access that and put that in the chat too, Andrea.
I can find that. Are there any other questions?
I'm curious if any of you have other examples of successful regional efforts. Communities just, I mean, I'm confident in my experience. I know that sometimes these do seem like a daunting effort. And I appreciate, Ellen, what you said about just like, let's just have coffee. Let's get together for an hour in some neutral location and just what's everyone up to?
Chris is not able to download it. I will work on that and I can email this. It's just a Word document right now out to everybody as well.
That sounds great, Ellen. Winning together instead of losing alone seems so simple.
I'd be interested too in people's thoughts on, I had entertained conversations with some folks a few years ago about the idea of sharing someone to help them with economic and community development between communities. And it seems like there's that immediate concern about, well, what if this town gets more services than that town? So that becomes their obstacle to why they don't have the conversation about sharing staff. And yet, this same argument could be made within a community. Someone within a community might feel like this sector gets more services than that sector, maybe by business types, like it's all primary sector, it's not enough retail services, or it's all about new businesses, it's not enough about existing businesses, or it's all about the downtown and what about the rest of the town, and so it's like at some point, how do we get over these things and just figure it out and realize that maybe in a given week or month, one thing might get more attention than the other, one town might get more attention than the other, but over the, duration of a collaboration like that, if everyone's committed to kind of to fairness and equity and there's accountability, it should sort of work itself out. But, just to get people over some of those initial perceived barriers.
I think a great example of that is when the data center came to Ellendale. There was great concern about all of these new people coming to town, and this community will never have the population it did at its height in the 60s. And so I just think gone are the days of everyone having two clinics, two grocery stores, two lumber yards, a sale barn. I mean, I just don't think that's a reality anymore. And to have those conversations about, okay, if you have this particular good and service, how can we focus on creating this? And I know there are economic developers out there who absolutely will not have that conversation. They will not share. They do not want to break down those barriers. And I think that's really unfortunate. Chris, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to share something that's been helpful in an experience I've had in the south central part of the state in getting some grocers to collaborate and think together. And in that project, it's really helped that the project driver is one of those doers in the community, and she's well respected, well liked. Everywhere we go, like each community we go to, she's hugging somebody that she knows or they're a relative of hers. And so that's been really helpful in the case of that project. So it's good to hitch your wagon to those doers who are liked and respected.
Yeah, that makes all the difference in the world to have the right people leading an effort. I like your terminology, the doers. I always think about the connectors. They're just certain people who can make things happen and who have foundational trust in a community, and that certainly helps. Great. I see Andrea has put several resources in the chat too.
Yeah, some people weren't able to open the whole document, so I just broke that up and put that in different sections in there so you have all of those resources, but we can certainly email them to you or they will be accessible on our website as well.
Thank you.
Anyone else have questions or examples? I think I wrote down, like, don't forget it starts with a conversation. And like some of the projects Jodi talked about, those started a really long time ago and they're still relevant. They're still having impacts in the communities. So it's never too late to start. I think it's definitely something that we can all remember. And then I think too, as funding, it seems like funding strings get a little tighter all the time, and we're encouraged to work together. But that can definitely be an advantage. As regional councils, we spend a lot of time just providing technical assistance for people and helping them make some of those connections. And so when we can share resources, it could be funding, it could be helping with match, maybe it's in-kind match. That definitely helps move projects to the next step.
Great examples.
Everyone's quiet today. Any other examples of regional collaborations or maybe how you've dug into some data and used that? I know NDSU Extension also offers grant writing workshop, and part of that workshop is kind of going through some of these things and finding that data, so you can answer some of those maybe hard questions or identify those needs in those grant applications. So definitely good resources and good information to have.
I will say just an example of data too is when in that Horizons program, another point that Dr. Rathke had pointed out at that time, uh, Ashley, the community of Ashley, North Dakota, was the oldest community age-wise, the oldest community in the country, in the United States, apparently. I just remember that was very startling. Like there were way more people dying than there were in kindergarten. I specifically remember that data point, like that more people were dying versus the size of the kindergarten class. And so that I think that was like a real kick in the pants to that community. And that community has a lot of great things happening right now, in regards to childcare, preschool, a really thriving Main Street now, and school. And so all of you know that there's these shining examples of communities that are getting it figured out. And I'd like to believe that one, it has to do with, you know, looking at resources, limited resources. How can we do better with what we have? Focusing on some trends, utilizing data, and being willing to try things that hadn't been done before, and breaking down some of those stereotypes of, standing alone and we haven't tried that before, so we're afraid to do that. I think the work that has happened with just the grocery stores and the regional buying opportunities. I mean, I think that's where we're headed. That's shining examples too of working together to save grocery stores in our rural communities. So be open to the possibilities. Have that conversation.
Definitely. So Ellen is asking if this will be recorded and available. Yes, it will. And it will be available on the North Dakota Association of Regional Council website. Not resource councils. I don't know why it still says that on there. So we'll make sure we get that fixed on the website. I'm going to stop recording, but that doesn't mean we're stopped.